Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And we're here today to talk about something that you may be experiencing. You may be feeling it yourself. And we're not therapists, so we're not going to cure you of this. But we do have some ideas.
Yes, it is Zoom fatigue.
And we're all tired of a lot of things, but we're only going to talk about Zoom fatigue today.
Or I would loop all video chats into that.
Well, yes. I mean, we have nothing
Skype,
against
Google Meet.
Yeah, we have nothing against Zoom in particular. I do love Microsoft, but I don't like Microsoft Teams, so maybe I will put them into a separate bucket. Every time I get invited to a Microsoft Teams call, it
never works ever, never.
It works. It's not.
Never works.
It's not as smooth. I'd rather do Zoom or Skype or something like that. And to my friends in Redmond, I am sorry because I do love. I'm doing this whole production is being done on Microsoft Windows. I've switched from the Mac, so I'm a huge fan of you guys. I'm not a huge fan of the Teams meeting software.
On that note.
So, Zoom fatigue. Everybody's talking about it. We have people saying, oh my God, Zoom fatigue. Yeah. And you've got people have come up with all of these quote unquote solutions like Zoom free Wednesdays or, no camera Tuesdays or I can't really wrap my mind around it, Ginny.
I think it's less about the technology and more about we're having meetings just to have meetings.
Yeah.
And I am finding that people are like, oh, we need to have a meeting about that. And you're like, no, we don't. We can put that in Slack or we can email it or whatever the communication method is. We do not need to have a meeting.
And I think that is really what this comes down to. It's not Zoom. It's not video. I mean, switching your meeting to audio isn't going to solve anything. I mean, let's think back a year or two. How many of us complained about how many conference calls we had to sit on, right? We didn't like conference calls. Those were audio only. There was no video. We used to complain about how many meetings we would have in the office. I mean, I know when I worked for some larger agencies, I would sit in meetings from literally sun up to sundown without a break in between.
You can't get anything done that way. How do you get anything done?
Right. And so it's not, the problem is not Zoom, folks. The problem is the meeting itself. You're having too many meetings. You have the wrong people in the meetings. You're not accomplishing what you need to accomplish. So address that. This is like, if someone's, bleeding, you just give them a Band-Aid and think you're done with it, right? That's the equivalent of turning off the camera, right? But if you don't figure out why you're bleeding...
Right. Yeah.
It's not really solving the problem. Solve the actual problem. Have a meaningful purpose for every meeting and think about, do you need everybody there?
And do you really need the meeting? I think is the most important. It's when this all started, when everybody started working from home, there was a conversation in one of the Facebook groups I'm in about this very topic. And the agency owner is male, and he said, I'm having trouble because my female employees have started to say they don't want to come to Zoom meetings anymore. So what do I do? And as we started to dig into it, a couple of things. One, he was having 3 check-in Zoom meetings a day. And I was like, dude, you cannot do that. Stop it. And so, the conversation I thought was really good and really engaged, and lots of people were contributing to it and asking him lots of questions. But that's what it came down to. They were having 3 check-in meetings a day on Zoom video chat because in the office they would see each other constantly, like that. And the other thing he said is, they're asking if we have to have these meetings, if we could do it on audio, but I like seeing everybody's faces. And I said to him, there's a difference between men and women on video chat. Men can throw on a ball cap and be happy and fine. Women cannot. And he's like, no, I don't care if they come in a ball cap. I'm like, it's not about you. It's about them and the other women that are coming to the Zoom meetings. Don't make them come to video chat 3 times a day.
Well, don't make them come to any meeting 3 times a day. I mean,
Yes.
What on earth could you possibly be working on unless you're in the midst of a crisis? What on earth could you possibly be working on that you need to meet with the same group of people 3 times in one day? it's just
Well, and I
it's
think it was
wholly
less-
unnecessary.
Yeah, I think it was less we had a need for a meeting and more that they were trying to figure out how to work from home and how to stay connected and how to
Right.
continue building culture and how to continue building team. And if they were there in person, then they would be having conversations. But, forcing somebody to come to a meeting 3 times a day to try to recreate that just doesn't work.
Right. Well, I think this is where people are using Zoom and these other technologies as almost a micromanagement tool, and it's because people aren't comfortable with the new environment. They don't know how to manage a remote workforce, and so they've substituted reason for just scheduling meeting after meeting, and they think that if they're doing that, they'll have control. But that's it's an illusion. I mean, even in the in-office environment, you don't have control over your team, right?
Right.
That's not how you should be looking at it. They're not, your team members are not like pieces of software where you have to hit buttons and click things and all that, right? They need to be able to accomplish things on their own. You need to set the direction, give them leadership, approve what you need to approve. But it's not just constantly meeting over and over. And even if you're in the office, you shouldn't be on top of them all day long. That's not useful.
No. And I always say I hire grown-ups so that I don't have to worry about this stuff. I'm not a micromanager. I don't want to micromanage. I want to give people expectations and say, go do your job. I don't want to have to do all that. Bleh. I had a friend whose boss used to read her emails. And I'm like, who has time? Why? Yeah, it was a bad environment.
Was the boss looking for something in particular, or was it just general micromanagement?
No, that was just general micromanagement. He read all of his direct reports' emails.
Wow. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times I've looked at employee emails. A few of them were because they were related to legal proceedings where we had to collect documents, right?
Sure.
So you have to do it then. And in that case, it always feels uncomfortable doing it. And then in a couple of cases, it was because I suspected employees of some wrongdoing of some sort. And so you have to investigate somehow. Right. But I mean, as a management tool, quote unquote, I mean, that's nuts.
Terrible.
That's nuts.
Terrible. Yes, terrible.
So, okay. So
he was a special breed, but yeah.
So if we agree that the technology isn't the problem, that it's the meetings themselves, I mean, what advice would you give to folks on how to set a good meeting cadence in this new environment? You've run a remote team for quite a while now. You've got a good sense for it. I mean, what is the right way to do this so that you don't end up in this situation?
It took a little bit of trial and error at first to sort of figure it out. So one of the things that where we are right now, and I think it's pretty comfortable, is we do a check-in every day on Slack. We don't do a stand-up meeting. We don't do a video chat. There's no audio. And truthfully, that's more because I don't want to have to be at a certain place at 8:30 every morning. I just don't want to, or 8 o'clock every morning, whatever it happens to be. So we do a check-in and we say, good morning. How is everybody? Hope you had a great night, weekend, whatever it happens to be. Here are my top 3 priorities for the day. And then, anything else that I have a doctor's appointment at this time, or I'm, whatever it happens to be. There's that opportunity for you to say what else you're doing during the day, so that if you have a lot of meetings or, or whatever it happens to be, or you're working on something for a client and can't, have to do deep work or something like that. So that's what that is. I do a direct report video chat most of the time with all of my direct reports once a week. We were doing an all agency meeting on Zoom every week, and that was too much. So then we moved it to every 2 weeks, and that was still too much. So now we do an all agency meeting once a month. And what we find is that, there's certainly our team meetings, but those are usually with clients. And then you have your direct report meetings, and then you get information from those meetings. So I think I'm in 4 hours of meetings a week just with direct report and agency running kinds of things. And then the big all agency meeting once a month. And that's it.
I mean, that sounds like a very reasonable schedule. Certainly it's not 3 times a day. So that's good.
No. And it's not every day either. And this from experience, there's 1 week a month I don't do any meetings.
Right. And I think, one of the things that you're doing well there too, that I think folks would be well to learn from, you have different kinds of meetings. So you've got your one-on-ones, you've got your all hands, you you have to mix it up. And I think that there is a tendency for people to just say, okay, we're going to have a daily check-in. And some days it may not even include conversation with most of the people on the call. It may effectively be a one-on-one with two people that just everybody else has to listen in on. And that's just, I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, you know, those are updates that probably could be done over Slack or email or something like that in most cases. Or you can speak one-on-one with those folks that you actually need to have those conversations with. And I think that in some respects, it's born out of, and I don't mean this in as negative a way as it's going to sound, it's out of laziness, right? By having a daily meeting with your whole team, you don't have to worry about, you know, what's the right frequency for each individual. You can just say, okay, we're bringing everybody together, and I'll just deal with whatever I need to deal with, even though it's irrelevant to, you know, 60% or 80% of the people on the call. And so you really need to be thoughtful about that. I mean, because I mean, we've all been in those kinds of meetings, right? Where we're sitting there and we're like, why am I here?
Yeah. Right.
Right. You know, what is the point? And back in the day when I was in larger agencies, I used to just start blowing off meetings just to see what would happen. I would just say, you know, I don't really think I need to be in this, so I'm going to see what happens if I don't go a couple of times.
If I don't go, yeah.
And half the time they didn't even notice that I wasn't there.
I'm sure.
Right? Because I wasn't contributing. They weren't talking to me. I was literally just a warm body in the room. And in most cases, I had a deputy or something like that who was already there. So you know, what's the point? And it was just, and we all run into this too, right? Where we will invite someone as a courtesy sometimes to meetings.
Sure.
That's a horrible practice, you know, because you're then putting that person in a position, if you haven't communicated with them. I mean, if you say to them, look, I'm adding you to this so you can come if you want, that's fine, right? Because you've made clear that it's a courtesy invite. But if you're in your mind, it's a courtesy invite and you haven't actually expressly communicated that, the person on the other end has to decide, well, so am I being disrespectful by not showing up? You know, so you're handling it wrong. So if you want to do a courtesy invite, just be clear that's what you're doing. And frankly, most of the time you don't need to do a courtesy invite because anybody who is senior enough to get a courtesy invite probably has better things to do with their time.
Definitely.
Hopefully has better things to do with their time. Otherwise, we need to have a conversation about agency profitability with that.
Right. Yeah, and you know, the other lesson that I've learned is I used to schedule those meetings for an hour, and what I discovered is that 15 or 20 minutes of them usually are business, and then there's 40 or 45 minutes of just chit-chatting. And it got to the point where I was like, I don't have time for this. Like, I'm happy to just sit here and chit-chat with you about politics and books and things like that, but I have to build my time. I have to do client work. We're in the middle of this crisis, whatever it happens to be. And so I started reducing the time over time. And so now the one-to-ones, depending on who they're with, are between 15 and 30 minutes. That's it.
Yeah. And generally you don't need more than that. I mean, I think
you don't.
You know, most meetings shouldn't be scheduled for longer than 30 minutes. If you're going to schedule something for longer than 30 minutes, you have to have a very clear agenda for it. Even at 30 minutes or less, you should still have some kind of an agenda.
For sure.
But I don't think it needs to be quite as detailed if it's a shorter meeting, because generally it's sort of everybody's kind of on the same page as to why we're getting together. But once you start going to a longer one, you need to have more structure to it, because otherwise you do end up wasting a tremendous amount of time in it. And look, we're in that weird situation. All of us are, where we don't have as much human contact. And so inevitably our calls and meetings do have more of that, chit-chat component, right? Because you're not getting it at the water cooler. You're not getting it when you go out to lunch with a colleague. You're not getting it as you walk through the hallways. But you still have to keep it under control.
You do. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I found is that certainly I like anybody else, like to have those conversations too, but an hour and a half of that is not appropriate. So I started reducing those.
No, I mean, and I'm a big believer that you shouldn't do any of these meetings over an hour. I think it is very difficult unless it's very project specific and you've really got a lot of ground you have to cover on a particular project. And even then, I'd suggest you may want to split it into multiple meetings. But it's very difficult to stay, whether you're sitting around a conference table or on Zoom or even on a conference call, staying focused on anything for an hour and a half or 2 hours is very difficult.
It's very challenging. I will tell you that I personally like to do those longer, especially if I'm doing like a board meeting or something right now, because we're not doing board meetings in person. And those usually last a little bit longer. I appreciate that they're a conference call versus a Zoom chat because I can do other things. I can walk the dog. I can do the dishes. I can fold the laundry, whatever. I mean, I can do other things because what happens is, and I know I'm not alone at this, when I'm sitting at my desk and I'm on Zoom and I'm seeing Slack notifications and text notifications and email notifications, after about 45 minutes, I start checking. So, and that's bad. And even if I have it turned off, I've got two other computers sitting here. So I'm still seeing it in some fashion. So if I get up and walk away from my desk, I'm far more focused on what the conversation is, especially for those longer conversations. But that proves your point that no human being can sit and be focused for more than half an hour, 45 minutes.
Right. And if
I hate to admit that out loud,
if you're on a Zoom call or anything like that where you can be checking your email and texting and slacking and all that, you probably don't need to be in that meeting.
No.
Right? Because if the meeting is not requiring your focus and keeping your focus, you probably shouldn't be there. Now there are an exception for sort of, half day, day long board meeting type things where, maybe you have to kind of keep half an eye on things. Even then I sort of hate it, and I've chaired a lot of these kinds of meetings over the years.
Yeah.
And I when I was younger, I was very much in that hard line. I don't want to see your phone out. I don't want to, and then over time I realized, well, occasionally keeping an eye on something may be beneficial, particularly if you're in an all-day meeting.
For sure.
Emergencies can crop up because typically the people around the table are fairly senior and do have things that need timely attention.
Sure.
But that said, if you're sitting there, I mean, I've been in those meetings where someone's just on their computer the whole time typing. I can guarantee you they're not taking meeting notes. I mean,
no.
They are not the meeting secretary, so they're not taking notes. That still drives me nuts. Yeah, just don't come. If you were that busy that you cannot, give 90% of your attention through the course of the meeting, just don't show up. Don't show up.
Yeah. And if you're in charge of those meetings, don't make them longer than they need to be.
Correct. But if you are on a Zoom call, shut down all the other windows, right? I mean, this is one of those lessons I've learned the hard way over. Just because even if you say I'm not going to pay attention to it, you see an alert pop up or just close them all. Plus, it will help with your bandwidth, and sometimes that helps in getting good audio and video quality.
Fair.
Something you and I love to discuss, right?
Something. Yeah.
Yes. For those of you who listened to last week's episode, our apologies for the technical difficulties.
I don't know, and it's frustrating because we had a guy come in and do all rewire everything, and I'm literally hooked into the internet via a wire. It's not Wi-Fi, and the fact that it's not working, I'm just like, ugh.
But I think today, Ginny, we've tracked it down to your microphone because you are now on your earbuds for the show, and we haven't. Knock on wood, we have not had any technical hiccups once you switch over to the earbuds. And that's
very frustrating because I have a very fancy, very nice, brand new microphone. So it should not be causing any problems.
Well, you'll have to have your guy look at it. See, the problem for me is I am my guy. So, when something goes wrong here, I have to do the rewiring and the reprogramming. And
I actually had to hire somebody to do that.
Hopefully they were wearing a mask, but no, we're not going there.
He was wearing
a
mask, and we were not here when he was here. Yeah.
Alas. All right. Well, I think hopefully we've given some folks some good ideas on how to make their meeting time more productive. It is not merely turning off the camera or having Zoom-free Wednesdays or all of these other crazy things that I've heard, because the problem is not the Zoom fatigue, it's meeting fatigue. It's a problem with your management structure and how you're going about things, and that's what you need to address. So solve the real problem. Don't just, put a Band-Aid on the symptom.
Have less meetings. Have less meetings.
Have less meetings. Fewer meetings, fewer people in those meetings, more results, which equals my favorite thing, more profits. I love profits,
More
Ginny.
money.
More money.
Show me the money.
And with that, we will show you the end of this episode. So we're drawing it to a close. I'm Chip Griffin,
And I'm Jenny Dietrich.
and it depends.